In the anime series Chainsaw Man, based on the original manga, a young man named Denji steps into an underworld of hunting devils and supernatural evil with a team of fellow hunters. The first season, produced by MAPPA Studios in Japan, is a high-level achievement in action and dramatic animation. In this video, we'll look at how the second episode creates cinematic shots to visualize the story. Per usual, there will be spoilers to the story of Chainsaw Man, so I recommend checking out the series before proceeding further. As a general story overview, the first 12 episodes of the series reveal the origin story of Denji and his pet devil, Pochita, as Denji discovers a new life hunting devils under the mysterious Makima. Denji is assigned to the stoic Aki while being paired with the wild fiend Power. The team falls in and out of various misadventures as more of the truth behind their operation is unveiled. So when looking at how to make cinematic shots, one place to start is analyzing the composition and figuring out the horizon line, as well as what elements are in the foreground, midground, and background. Lens choices can also be part of the equation. In cinematic shot number 1, Denji and Makima are sitting in the backseat of a traveling car. It looks like a slightly wider lens is used with the camera pointed down to create a 3-point perspective. Denji and Makima are the focus of the shot, so the characters in the front seats are blurred to help create depth in the shot. This kind of wider shot helps to establish context and tells us more about the environment of the scene. In cinematic shot number 2, Makima and Denji are talking in a dialogue scene as they get food. The focus of the shot is on Makima and her facial expression and acting. Denji is in the foreground, slightly blurred, and we see his back. The camera is technically closer to an over-the-shoulder shot used in dialogue scenes, and it is staged around waist level of the characters and tilted upward. This is a more dynamic way to film a dialogue scene because of the upshot angle, and we also see some of the surrounding environment and sky plane. In cinematic shot number 3, this is a wide shot with Denji in the center of the frame, apparently looking to camera. The composition doesn't have as much spatial depth compared to previous shots, but we see the background elements blurred to help us focus on Denji. The horizon line of the shot is a little above his chin, and we see 1-point perspective being used here. The composition of boxes in the background help to frame Denji, creating a frame within a frame effect. In cinematic shot number 4, the camera is focused on Makima once again, highlighting her facial expression and acting. Denji is in the foreground, turned toward Makima, and he is slightly out of focus, so our eyes go to Makima. The camera is around the chest level for Denji, tilted upward. This is probably a longer lens being used to compress space around Denji and Makima. In cinematic shot number 5, we see the reverse angle from the previous shot. Now the focus of the shot is on Denji, and he is clearly seen. The camera is staged around Makima's shoulder, and she is slightly out of focus. The background is also blurred. A longer lens is also probably being used here to compress the space between Denji and Makima, while limiting wider views of the surrounding environment. Story-wise, this helps us to zero in on Denji and Makima's dialogue interaction, as we don't need environmental cues at this story beat. In cinematic shot number 6, the camera is placed low, a little below Denji's waist, and it's pointed upward to capture his dramatic expression. This is a wider lens capturing Denji's acting in his face and body in the environment of the elevator. His hand in the foreground is slightly distorted in proportion since it's closest to the camera lens, and this indicates the wider lens being used. A 3-point perspective is used since the camera is pointed upward, and we can see the alignment of Makima and the character on screen left helps us to sense the perspective grid. In cinematic shot number 7, we see another flatly staged composition with Makima in the center and within the lower half of the frame. She appears to be looking directly toward the camera. The grid of the window pane is arranged to draw our eyes toward Makima, as she stands out as a contrasting element. The horizon line is around Makima's eyes in this shot. Sometimes a grid-like pattern helps to foreshadow parts of the story, creating a sense of feeling trapped or caged. In cinematic shot number 8, we see a reverse angle from the previous shot. Now we're seeing Denji's reaction to Makima. He is in the center of the frame, and there's more negative space in this shot compared to the grid that was behind Makima. This shot is also flatly staged, but the background is slightly out of focus, so our eyes land on Denji. The door behind Denji forms a frame around him, creating a compositional element, which is the frame within a frame visual. In cinematic shot number 9, we see a longer lens used to compress the various visual planes of foreground, midground, and background. The focus of the shot is Aki and Denji walking from screen right to screen left in the crowd. There are crowd members in the foreground who are out of focus, and crowd members in the background, including the building, are also blurred. Using the longer lens compresses space between the camera lens and all the characters, creating a claustrophobic, boxed-in feeling in the busy street setting. In cinematic shot number 10, this is likely using a longer lens once again as we focus in on Aki and his acting. The top of Denji's head and some trash bags are blurred in the foreground. The background showing the side of the building in the alley are also out of focus. When we look at the pipes, doorways, and air units on the building, the space in between these elements look compressed, so it suggests a longer lens is being used. This might be used to create a sense of feeling trapped, which Denji would be experiencing at this story beat. In cinematic shot number 11, the camera lens is high above the ground, pointed down toward Aki and Denji. This is a 3-point perspective, and probably a wider lens is being used to show us more of the environmental space and context. This informs us of the setting and helps us to understand the physical space around Aki and Denji for future shots in this scene. In cinematic shot number 12, a longer lens is being used where Denji and a fallen Aki are in focus in the midground. Props and trash in the foreground are blurred. The space in between the buildings in the alley are compressed, so this suggests a longer lens is being used. The brightly lit space in the center of the frame helps draw our eye toward Denji and Aki in the center of the frame. In cinematic shot number 13, the camera is highlighting Denji's performance as he is in the center of the frame. This is a 3-point perspective, and the lens could be close to a 50mm lens or slightly wider than this value. The alignment of the windows in the building helps us to see the perspective grid for this shot. With the camera angled for this upshot on Denji, it makes him look more menacing and dominant in this shot, which fits the particular story beat during his fight with Aki. In cinematic shot number 14, the camera is close to the ground with the horizon line below the frame. Aki is in the foreground, slightly out of focus. Denji is in the midground, and he is in focus. We see the power dynamics between them with this shot as Denji has beat up Aki. There's also a slight 3-point perspective with the camera lens turned upward. The lens is probably a little wider to allow for Aki's foot to appear slightly larger in proportion. In cinematic shot number 15, we see a 2-shot of Denji and Power looking a little bit above the camera lens to a character off screen. There's a slight 3-point perspective with the camera tilted upward. Background elements form boxes around Denji and Power to help create a frame within a frame effect. In cinematic shot number 16, we'll look at a few frames within the same shot. Power is jumping off the building top and toward camera, wielding a giant hammer formed from blood. The camera is tilted upward, and the perspective grid is informed by the out-of-focus building in the background. It's a 3-point perspective. This shot could be using a slightly longer lens to restrict our view of the surrounding environment and to compose the shot so we focus on Power. As we can see in the subsequent frames for this shot, Power gets closer and closer to camera until her eye fills the frame. This is dynamic because she's moving in spatial depth toward the camera, enhancing its cinematic feel, and that's a key element to staging action. So overall, these technical descriptions of each shot helps break down the elements of what makes them cinematic. The language of film as shown in composition, lens choice, and camera movement are well executed in this episode to heighten the drama and action.